Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and welcome to another indie book review. And it's time for another sequel. I have to admit, I love getting sequels because it's just a lot of fun to come back to a story, even though sequels don't do that well view-wise because you have to have already read the first book to be interested in the review of the second, but that's fine. I love it anyway. So I am reviewing Hunter Shan Rising Storm by J.T. Harris. This is a sequel to Prince Noralv Edge of Shadows. I believe the series is just called the Prince Noralv series. I'm not exactly sure. So if you're interested in that book and you don't want to get spoiled for it in this review, I will have that down in the description below. Go click through that, watch that video to make up for all of the views I'll lose on this one. But anyway, this book takes place literal seconds after the end of the first one. It moves right on, and I like that concept in theory. However, I waited a really long time between these books. Months. So, when I picked this one back up and got back into it, I realized that I've forgotten a lot of names, and especially magic systems, and a lot of like world building stuff did not come back immediately, and that's usual for fantasy with a lot of world building. It's always slow in the beginning, but usually it's not as slow as the first book in the series, and this one a little bit felt like that. That might be on me for waiting so long, but I just thought I'd throw that out there. This one, we also have more variety in our protagonists. In the first book, it's mostly just Prince Thane, our unannounced prince, who has a piece of the goddess stuck inside him and must try to find a way to deal with all the power he has that he doesn't really know what to do with. And also the girl he meets at this academy, Luella, and her search to find her father. And they find out that whatever her father was studying also has a connection to the process essentially that took off a piece of a deity and accidentally got lodged in this unannounced prince. This one, however, also includes Thane's sister Daria, who was kidnapped along with him in the first one. And I really liked that she was included because that was like a constant thing for me. Like, okay, we know she's kidnapped and held hostage and like in the grips of these kidnappers, but like we have no idea how she's doing or if she's still alive, which I guess was probably part of the thing, like you want to build up tension. You don't know if she's alive or doing well, but this one, it tells you. And she is really, I like how the character is both empowered, but not to a caricature standpoint, because that's the one thing with books that are increasingly more obsessed with using feminism as a buzzword, that you end up with these female characters that are so obsessed with being strong that it drowns everything else out. But while she can use a bow staff pretty well at the age of 13, she's still a 13-year-old and is still very vulnerable and wants her big brothers to protect her. And you also see another one of her brothers over the course of the story, and I loved that aspect that, again, indie YA tends to have characters that are much more vulnerable than traditional YA because they have new adults, so you don't need to make your teenagers pseudo 20-somethings. And I love that. I also love our new character, Shan, who is the apprentice to Master Quentin from the first book, who is one of my favorite characters. I go for those grumpy old mentor characters that like still secretly care about their charges. I love them. They're one of my favorite character tropes, especially in like older characters. And she is basically stuffed with a lot of blessings of the gods that makes things a little bit muddy power wise, and she has this berserk mode, and I love a good berserk mode. I'm an orc berserker when I play Skyrim, so she is both very powerful and very afraid of that power, a lot like Thane, so it's a lot of the continuation of those themes. She's a lot more standoffish and unsure, but also like very dedicated to the Herdabian cause, which is the cause that Master Quentin is also a follower of. And speaking of causes, this book also, well, I don't want to spoil anything, but let's just say things get a lot more complex politically. Things are revealed that show that the black and white way that both Thane and Daria, and even Luella to a certain extent, viewed the world is much muddier than that. And I love that. I love when high fantasy politics gets muddy. It's half the fun. Again, Skyrim. So I really enjoyed the growing aspects, and I feel like we're leading towards, if not a full like war, then at least a political clash, a battle of some kind between rebels and this empire, I guess. Feels weird to say Rebels and Empire. It kind of gives like Star Wars vibes, but no, I can kind of see some Star Wars vibes. Regardless, this book also takes place a lot more outside the academy, which I really loved because that was my biggest issue with the first one. Was I was promised a quest in the synopsis, and we spend like 3/4 of the book at this academy, and I'm not the biggest fan of like boarding school or academy-esque stories, so that kind of bummed me out. But this one is much better. There's also a lot more emphasis on Thane's relationship with his father, which is not a picture-perfect father-son relationship, but you can tell that the father cares a ton, and I love that. I feel like fathers that are there and invested in their kid's life, in YA especially, is very like few and far between. Like, you see him more than you see Thane's mom, and I believe she is still alive. So I really enjoyed that aspect. The one struggle that I had with this one was there were certain times where it felt like it was spinning its wheels because on paper a lot was happening, but it didn't necessarily further things. And the one problem was that things were explained to characters on the page. And what I mean by that is, in most cases, once the reader knows something, or it has been explained 1 or 2 times, from then on it'll be like, oh, I should tell you. And then like a quick 2-sentence, so-and-so explained to them, and you move on. But in this case, we had people like just learning about the kidnapping of the royal children, which happened at the beginning of the first book, but the characters are spending like a gigantic portion of the time be like, oh my gosh, the prince and princess have been kidnapped, and you knew about this? And it's like, yeah, that was the beginning of the first book. We're like way beyond that at this point. So there's a little bit too much of that where like the explanations that, yes, in theory, in the verisimilitude of the world would happen, were drawn out on the page. And so it was like, yeah, we already know this information. Kind of struggles with it. But once everyone was on the same page, it really took off. And there were fights with dragons and magical powers. And I love the way that Bullacraft in this world is described, because I can imagine it. And there's a lot of like bright, shimmering light magic, which honestly I don't see a lot of in fantasy. It's more like it's a feeling. But in this case, it's like, no, bright silver magic in your face. And it makes it better. Or maybe that's just me and my love of bright, shiny things. I don't know. But like the first one, this one ends on a gigantic cliffhanger, and I can tell, like this one, the next book is probably going to pick up literal seconds after this one ends, and I'm still caught on whether or not I'm a fan of that style. Because on one hand, it is a very effective cliffhanger. Because, like, you know, strange man steps out from behind a tree and says something mysterious, and I was like, what? But on the other hand, if I wait too long, or I don't think the third book is even out right now, so I kind of have to wait, I'm not really sure that I'll remember. But it's definitely a very particular style. It's definitely something that is, if continues, will be a very big hallmark of J.T. Harris' writing. And I'm really trying to get into more like the characteristics of specific indie authors. Like, I want to know like what little things will be repeated in the books. And in this case, really short time spans between books happening seems to be her thing. Time will tell if it continues throughout the rest of the series, because my guess is this is probably going to be a pretty long series. Because again, the spinning the wheel thing also means that like it was only slightly moved down the road. And I don't think that's a case of like a trilogy issue, because, you know, like a second book in a trilogy often tends to be like a point A to point B, just get them here so we can get to the end. Stuff that happened, new characters were introduced, so like there are things different, but judging based on how little we are moving towards the big thing at the end happened here, to let those relationships and new characters be introduced, and the relationship I shipped coming to fruition, it's my favorite. Anyway, so because of that, I have a feeling this will probably be a really long series. Fortunately, the books aren't that long. This one was actually shorter than the first one. So I I would definitely suggest this one if you like the first. This one, it keeps up more of the same. The characters are still both powerful and vulnerable, which I love. Oh, indie books just do YA so well. So I really appreciate this one. 4 stars. JT Harris, if you would like to send me the third review, I will not say no, and I will try not to take so long. No promises. If you are an indie author and you'd be interested in a review like this one, please email me. I will have my email down in the description below. I will also have my review policy down there. Please give that a read through. It answers a lot of questions and saves us a lot of time. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.